Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positron.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to review the season 2 finale of Star Trek Picard, which was called Farewell. And as the episode begins, we find our crew at the Chateau as they're getting ready to head to the rocket launch to protect it from, being interfered with by Dr. Soong. And when Rios mentions the prophecy about there having to be two Renee'S and can't seem to understand it, Not Laris and Picard kind of share a look, but they don't say what they're thinking because Not Laris says later Picard. So I'm wondering what the heck that's about as I'm watching this. Anyway, Not Laris transports them all to her office in California and then talks about how she's going to transport into mission control on launch day. And she hands everybody a bunch of devices that are kind of like their tricorders. And it's like, where was all this liberal use of her tech, specifically her transporter, when they needed, to do stuff, most importantly, to transport places like to the ship? I mean, yeah, she used her tech a couple of times, but like she's just doling it out now. And it's like, really? Anyway, she goes to transport herself to mission control, and Picard steps into the cloud and grabs a hold of her so that he can go with her, which was unexpected. Apparently, Not Laris is taking it upon herself to risk her life because she thinks that's what has to happen to fulfill the prophecy. And Picard doesn't want her to, but she tells him it's her choice and that, he's not the boss of her. And, that he can't save everybody, and that's just the way it is. So off she goes. The rest of the crew transports to Dr. Soong's lab, and they find his drones there, but he's not there. And apparently he's set these drones up to launch and target the mission, target the rocket. And of course, because they gave away the ship, they can't use the ship to hack the drones, and they're having difficulty doing that on the ground. And this prompts Raffi to get the idea that she can gain control of the drones manually so they can control where they go by hacking the system conventionally, like with tools. So she asks them to grab whatever they can find, screwdrivers and chisels and so forth, which was kind of silly. But again, they don't have all their regular tech at their disposal. Meanwhile, Not Laris puts on a flight suit and pays Renee a visit. And Renee immediately recognizes that she shouldn't be there, but also seems to recognize her from having seen her before. Not Laris, who of course is Talon, gains Renee's trust by telling her about how over the years she probably did see her when she was unable to completely hide herself while watching over Renee. And she explains that part of the time she probably was letting herself be seen because she wanted Renee to know that she was there and that she was okay, or that she would be okay. We then see Renee take off into the hallway where she finds Dr. Soong and says, the space lady is here and she's telling me she's my guardian angel or something. And Dr. Soong says, it's okay. He touches her on the cheek, come with me. But when he did that, he apparently infected her with a neurotoxin through a patch on his hand so that, she would croak and not be able to carry off the mission. Back at the lab, Rios ends up being able to take out the drones either by shooting some of them with one of the other ones or crashing them into each other and so forth. Next, we see that Renee stumbles out of one of the buildings at mission control, right where Picard is. And he sits down with her as she seems to be struggling and asks her if there's something they can do to make her better, to counteract whatever's bothering her. And she says, it's too late. And then the rocket launches, and I'm like, wait a minute. Why did they launch the rocket without Renee? And then Picard tells Renee to look up and watch the launch. Of course, look up being a catchphrase from this season. And as she does this, she turns off her facial manipulation device, and it turns out that it's not Laris, that it's Talon, who's been infected. And she then dies, telling Picard to absolve himself of not having been able to save her, because if for no other reason, with the rocket successfully launching, he's probably already saved countless lives in the future. And she passes away. which, was kind of poetic because it was just at the moment where her mission to protect Renee up to the point where she became Renee, as it were, in the history books, she passes away. It was some sort of poetic there. But then we join Dr. Sung back at his place where he's watching a broadcast about the mission and is rather displeased. And we then see that his daughter is hacking his computer remotely and erasing all of his work, which of course really pisses him off. And then he reaches into his desk and takes a single file folder out, and it's labeled Project. And I was like, he's apparently the geneticist that creates the super beings, of which Khan was one, but didn't Khan's ship launch in 1999? Or am I thinking of something else? I'll have to look into that because I just thought of that. And that's a huge problem if it did. Because otherwise it could have been cool, right?
Khan is my name.
What was the exact date of your liftoff? We know it was sometime in the early 1990s, but...
I find myself growing fatigued, Doctor. May we continue this questioning at some other time?
Anyway, we then see Corey get a message to go to a certain address if she wants to see what's next. And when she gets there, she meets Wesley frickin' Crusher, who of course is now a traveler. And he explains that he's among a group of people who are behind the supervisors, who dispatch the supervisors, and that along with the supervisors, his colleagues watch and protect history. And he recruits her right there on the spot to be a supervisor. And she accepts. Back at the Chateau, Rio puts a bunch of tech in a bag, Starfleet tech, saying that it's all the technology that they had dropped or had put down somewhere so that, it's all collected and no one will find it and disrupt the timeline. And then Seven and Raffi have a bit of a snog after talking about how they're stuck in the past, but they aren't going to despair over it. Picard goes and puts the skeleton key back in the wall, and Q shows up, noting that by doing so, he absolved himself and chose to, have his life follow the course that it followed, where he in fact does lose his mother and lives his whole life without her so that he can be the current version of himself versus a different version that, might have grown up with his mother. And that, in that he forgives himself and may even have deemed himself worthy of making a connection so that he won't go through his entire life alone, which was apparently Q's plan. And Picard asks him, why me? Why focus on me to teach these lessons to? Why focus on me to help in this crazy way that you've always done? And Q explains how he's moving on, which in human parlance would be dying, and that it's happening to him alone, which he regrets, and he doesn't want that for Picard. And I really thought that was cool, and I'll get into that a little bit more further on. But Q explains in the scene that he's always had a particular affection for Picard, and that even gods have favorites, and that the only reason he ever did any of this is because he was fond of Picard, not because Picard needed to be, shunted through various lessons or experiences in order to be important to history or whatever, just because he wanted him to be happy. So Picard takes the whole crew to meet Q, and when Q says he's going to send them back, Rios decides he wants to stay in the past, which everybody but me saw coming. I thought that he was going to end up taking the woman and the kid to the future with him, because I didn't think he would sort of abandon his duty to live out the life that he had lived out in service to the timeline. I didn't think he would do that or risk changing it further, but just because he knows stuff and might inadvertently change the timeline. But again, we'll get into that later. before Q leaves to his end, Picard says, "You're not going alone," and he embraces Q. And while Q is a little confused, he embraces him back. And, you know, on the one hand, you're like, oh, sure, they're going to have a hug. They're, you know, he's like been Picard's mortal enemy, and he's going to hug him. But at the same time, you know, you realize, and it's not the first time, Picard has done things before that, while they seemed menacing, were actually helpful and actually gifts to Picard and others. And so I really thought that was a good moment, because Q is dying, and this whole arc of this season has culminated in what is basically a redemption arc for Q. Because, yeah, okay, sometimes he was doing people a favor with his shenanigans, but he didn't always go about it the best way. He was kind of a jerk a lot of the time. And so this is really a redemption for Q. And, you know, it comes because he's dying. So it's kind of like, well, yeah, so you're changing your ways because you're dying. But I love a good redemption arc either way. And so I thought it was very cool. And of course, John Delancey is exquisite as Q, and really has been this whole time, which has been a bright, you know, mark on this season, which was full of a lot of dumb. So I was glad to see that. But next, we're back on the Stargazer, and Picard cancels the auto-destruct, realizing that the Queen on the bridge is in fact Jurati. And it turns out that there's a massive galactic eruption thing that's threatening to destroy the whole sector. And the Borg realized that if they joined with the Federation fleet and harmonized all their shields with their own, they could protect the sector from the event, which is why she sought out Picard with the particular message, which used the song that he had told her about in the past. And, you know, I thought that was really cool. It sort of tied that back. And she looked cool as the Borg Queen once the mask came off. But the really cool thing was that as they're about to try this, Picard says, well, Seven, because you know more about the Borg than anybody on the ship, I'm giving you a field commission. And she sits in the captain's chair and starts giving orders, partly in his name and partly, you know, of her own tactical thinking. And that was really, really cool. And I wish that she would be in the third season in Starfleet, but I don't know if that's going to be the case. We shall see. We know that she's said goodbye to the character from things she said in the press, but we don't know if it's after the third season or at this point. So we shall see. But as they're pulling off this shield maneuver, they realize that Eleanor is alive and aboard the Excelsior as a gift from Q. It turns out that all of the shields held together managed to fend off the danger from the anomaly until it dissipated. In its place, a transwarp conduit appears. And Agnes says that not even the Borg, with all their knowledge, know exactly what it is, except that it's the piece in a puzzle that will soon evolve into a threat. And she requests provisional membership in the Federation so that they can remain at the event horizon and keep it under observation, which I thought was cool. But we already know that Jurati isn't in season 3, so like, are they just going to leave that there, or is that the part, or is that the plot of season 3? We don't know. We then join Picard back in LA visiting Guinan, and it turns out that Rios and the doctor did great work during their lives in the medical field, and that the boy is in fact the one who actually made use of the microorganism that Renee finds on the mission to figure out how to clean the air and the water, saving the environment. And I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was very Star Trek. And, you know, it was good to see Guinan again. And then Picard returns to the Chateau. And it turns out that in his absence, Laris had the solarium fixed so that he could, you know, go and reflect on better days when it was, not broken. And he says, you know what, I think I've had all of the reflecting that I can handle. I'm going to look forward. And, she lets him know that she's leaving to go off on her own adventures, but he asks her to stay, saying that, he sees what's left of his life as a second chance, and he wants her around, basically, which he says without saying. And it seems like she agrees to stay. So we'll have to see what happens there in season 3, because that's where the episode ended. I liked this episode. I thought, of course, that the main plot involving, I don't know if that is the main plot, but the plot involving the rocket launch was handled a little bit, snappy dappy, like it was a little pat and happened a little quickly. But, that's what they had to do, I guess, because they spent so much time. I don't know that they had to do it. That's what they did after spending 9 episodes drawing it out, ridiculously at some points. So I don't know. The pacing of this season and the way they told that story was all off, if you ask me. But I think it ended well enough. It's just kind of makes you laugh that this is how they ended it after 10 episodes. Like, they could have done this 4 episodes ago. But anyway, I thought it was good, and I thought that the Q story was resolved really well. As I said, I liked that a whole bunch, but there again, they didn't need 10 episodes to tell that story. Just like they didn't need 10 episodes to tell the story about Picard and his mother, which, as you recall, I thought was excellent as well, if not for the way they drew it all out. Even though, it was an odd experience for him to go through that late in life. But I thought it ended well. I thought that the Borg timeline, the Borg storyline resolved well also, where, Agnes explains that she came to help a friend and that she knew she could trust him. And I think it's cool that we're seeing a changed Borg because, again, it's a redemption arc. It's a plot development. It's similar to what happened with the Klingons, where they were the enemies of the Federation, but they became allies. So I always like those kinds of things. So I thought it was cool. Hey, now the Borg are good guys. I like it. I'm not so sure the whole thing about, you should turn good because you're lonely made a lot of sense. They could have kind of left that out and just explained the need for the Borg to change and evolve differently than just basically making it. They think the Queen was lonely and that she didn't have to be lonely anymore. I thought that was dumb, but I like the idea of the Borg changing and evolving and becoming allies of the Federation, or at least, less hostile. And I think they resolved that well. It was damn heroic to see all those ships holding back the damaging eruption from the anomaly as people on different nearby planets looked up and saw it all happening from a distance, big light in the sky and so forth. And, it saved billions of lives. So I thought that was cool. I loved that Seven was given a field commission. Jerry Ryan, was awesome in this season, despite the fact that a lot of the lines they gave her were dumb, but she was great. She was fantastic in the final scene. Seeing her just take command like that was awesome. So, when the season started, I said, hey, it looks like it's going to be better than season 2. And the first couple of episodes are really great. Then we got a whole bunch of dumb, towards the end of which we got some good stuff when we saw what became of Picard's mother, and then again in this episode. So on the whole, let's say I like where they got to with all of the storylines that they started us off with. But I really wasn't a big fan of how they got there, drawing it out, dumb moment after dumb moment. So I don't know. Maybe the 3rd season will be even better. Maybe, the 3rd time is the charm. We shall see. And I, of course, will be back to review season 3. For now, I take my leave. And of course, I wish you peace and long life.